All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour. The truce between Israel and Hamas has ended. On day 56 of the Israel-Hamas war, there have been images of Israeli airstrikes and air bombings on the Gaza Strip. And according to reports that have come in so far, at least about 109 innocent Palestinian civilians have been killed in this campaign of air bombings that Israel has resumed on the hapless citizens in the Gaza Strip. After 7 days of a military pause, the hospitals in Gaza are again in the same vulnerable condition. A new wave of wounded are now flocking to the hospitals all over again, and this is what has been happening in the Gaza Strip ever since this morning. Desperate for treatment, desperate to save the lives of their wounded brethren.
Medical teams could not bear the big number of patients that arrived to the hospitals of Gaza Strip as a result of pile-up of previous cases in the hospitals. Their departure to outside Gaza Strip is very slow. There are still hundreds of cases in the departments of all hospitals in Gaza Strip.
So as the war resumes, the question of course remains, have the mediators failed in extending the truce? And if they did fail, is Israel intending to expand its ground offensive with devastating consequences? As for the latest, the Israeli air bombings have been reported across the enclave, including in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. The Israeli military has announced that it is now dividing the entirety of Gaza into dozens of numbered blocks. It has dropped leaflets on Gaza with a QR code to a website with a map of all the areas and also geolocating people within them. Remember, Israel has the address and the telephone number of every individual in the Gaza Strip. So the innocent civilians in Palestine are asking, after assuring North Gazans to take shelter in the southern part of Gaza, why is Israel now attacking the hapless Palestinian civilians, half of whom are children, in the southern part of Gaza? Because no part of Gaza at this moment is now a safe zone.
We left from Al-Qara village to Khan Yunis, and all of a sudden, after the temporary truce, the Israelis came up with new orders telling us that people from Al-Qara, Habatan and Al-Fuza had to leave to Rafah. I mean from day one, from one place to other and another, from the north to the south, from the center, who knows where next. And there is no electricity, no water, no food, no good living conditions, and we are patient.
So even though the renewed offensive appears to be wide-ranging, the question, of course, is what happens to the hostages? What happens to those military personnel who at this moment are in the custody of Hamas? Now, since the truce was announced and extended, Hamas, remember, has freed an estimated 110 captives, including 80 Israelis. In exchange, Israel has released about 240 Palestinians, including women and young children, many of whom had been detained by Israel for several months without even a charge against them. Now, the prospect of Israel expanding its ground offensive in the southern part of Gaza has heightened international anxiety, including in the White House, which has now warned its close ally to try and moderate its military tactics to reduce further civilian fatalities.
In my meetings today with the Prime Minister and senior Israeli officials, I made clear that before Israel resumes major military operations, it must put in place humanitarian civilian protection plans that minimize further casualties of innocent Palestinians.
Now, with most Israelis supportive of a war they see as essential to their own security, Netanyahu has also said that war would restart with full force after negotiations had run their course. Hence, after a week in which diplomacy was given a chance, violence in Gaza is back again. And this is what the scene at this moment looks like in the Gaza Strip. And also to give us more perspective in terms of what is happening at this moment in the Gaza Strip, we're being joined by retired Colonel Rich Outzen, who is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and also at the Jamestown Foundation, is joining us live from Washington, D.C. Now, Colonel Laudsen, this of course is a critical moment in this war. The military pause that had run its course for about 7 days has snapped and Israel has begun bombing the Gaza Strip again. But a lot of questions are asking, is Israel using a military option for an issue that needs to be solved politically? What is your take on that?
Well, it's good to be with you, and I will refer back to Karl von Clausewitz, the Prussian military theorist from a couple centuries back, who said that war is a continuation of politics or policy by other means. The truth is, it's wrong to think of the political solution to this conflict and the military solution as alternatives to one another. In essence, they are complements. Now, if you have one without the other, then it essentially is a useless exercise. So it needs to be clear that there is a political goal in mind here, and any military activity that's done simply for punishment without a political strategy would be wrong. So I think the Israelis actually have a political goal. It is the end of Hamas's control over the Gaza Strip. I think they need to take one step further and say, what is the ultimate nature of the political life for the Palestinians there? It can't just be occupation, and it can't be sealing them off in Gaza, because that hasn't worked either. So I agree with the thrust of your question, which is that there's an incomplete political logic underlying the military operations.
And also the American position has been that Israel must pay more closer attention to the number of civilian casualties that we've witnessed in this war. More than 15,000 Palestinians have been killed. 70% of them are women and children. Now, the Americans are urging a restraint in terms of the ground offensive in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. Do you think the Americans will have any kind of leverage in restraining the Israelis? Because the objective of the Israelis, or at least the intention as it comes across, is that now the Israelis want to go into the southern part of the Gaza Strip, especially in Khan Yunis, with their ground offensive.
Well, I think the U.S. is doing the right thing by pressing for a humanitarian relief plan and for a better plan to protect civilians than we saw during the first phase of Israel's ground operation. I don't think it's the intent of the United States to prevent Israeli ground operations from occurring, even in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, because there is, after all, significant Hamas and other militant groups' infrastructure in those areas. So it would be remiss of the Israelis not to try to go in and destroy some tunnels and to destroy this military infrastructure. That said, I think what they need to do is be very deliberate about it, and they need to be much more careful in terms of warning civilians. So I think they're going to do it. I think this is going to go on for weeks and perhaps months more. The Israelis have stated very clearly they won't feel safe until Hamas's military infrastructure is destroyed in the south as well as in the north.
All right. Now, my final question to you, Colonel Laudsen, is this. Now, is it realistically possible that Israel can actually destroy Hamas? Because while it is going about destroying Hamas, what it appears to be doing is it is virtually destroying the Gaza Strip. 50% of all buildings in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed. 15,000 people have been killed. 6,000 plus children have been killed. And the more this war drags on, the less is international support for Israeli actions. Do you think, the longer this war drags on, Israel will actually continue losing its support that it has with the international community, although the West will back it?
Well, so there's two questions there. The first is, can they destroy Hamas? And I guess the answer to that question is not in the political sense, but perhaps in the military sense. If we think about, as a parallel, the destruction of the Islamic State's caliphate in Syria, that was done through military means. Their ability to control territory was ended primarily through military strikes. And yet Islamic State ideology, and in terms of its ability to conduct small terrorist attacks, the group itself still exists. So destroying Hamas is probably as futile in the political sense as it has been with the Islamic State. However, I think Israel can prevent it from carrying out the sorts of attacks. Now, to go back to the political logic question, you're right. The international support for Israel will decrease over time. And the only thing that can create a political win, so to speak, for Israel, where the Gaza population is better disposed and better off and less likely to support Hamas, would be significant rebuilding with international aid. And Israel needs to make sure that it allows room for that to happen. And that's why it will listen to the calls, hopefully, to protect civilians.
Absolutely, indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Colonel Laudsen, for joining us and getting us that perspective there.
Good to see you. Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.